Grasping that a universal motive is the maximization of prestige conjoined with the minimization of effort can really help us clarify how things work by way of people, by way of ourselves, by way of society. What does that mean? We say that on the one hand, there is always a motive, always a desire to increase as much as possible, hopefully, the prestige that I can enjoy. By prestige, meaning the respect, the authority, the power um, that can be associated as well with wealth, or it can be associated with name and fame, whatever the case might be. So, the desire to maximize that while at the same time paying the least price for it. In some sense, at least according to our sort of animal ethics, that makes perfect sense and it's perfectly logical. Of course, I want the most for the least. I want the best quality product and I want to pay the least for it. I want to have the nicest, perhaps largest home that I can afford while paying the least for it. So it makes sense that I want to have as much name and fame and respect and prestige, so far as that's different, as possible, while at the same time paying the smallest possible price for it. And this phenomenon we see manifested, of course, across the board. Any situation such as permits a person to latch on to some kind of prestigious organization, institution, any situation where a person can uh, appear to have increased accolades, we see that those are situations where we oftentimes run to. So, for example, um, imagine if it was possible to get the prestige of something such as being um, a Navy SEAL, right? In different countries, some sort of special forces commando. If it was possible for me to gain that prestige while not actually taking the steps needed to become a Navy SEAL, to become a commando, the incredible pain and distress and duress and time as well that takes. Imagine if I could somehow gain that respect, gain that name, and not have to pay that price. Again, on the face of it, it's perfectly logical that I would so do, and I would run to some such opportunity. So, as it concerns such running, we find several classes. One would be blatant, outright scamming, where the person, him or herself, knows full well that it's a question of deception. That would be, or examples of that could include, for example, somebody faking a diploma. The person who fakes a diploma and says, I'm a doctor, I'm a PhD, unless he or she has really kind of contact with reality, does not think that he or she really has that prestige. Right? It's purely for some kind of transactional um, reason. Right? I'm going to impress others, I'm going to make money, something like this, but I know what I'm doing. Right? Call me doctor when I'm not really a doctor. Somebody could fake their military credentials. I want the prestige of having been in the military, of being a veteran, perhaps of being a hero in the military, not having done so. I want the prestige of being, an airplane pilot or something like that, as depicted in different kinds of movies that people try to do that, of being a big banker. And so I just blatantly make things up. So that's one class, right, which is obviously always a factor, but it's a little bit more obvious, at least once we get the idea, right, that this is what's going on. It's no question, this is a scam, period. What is, however, more subtle and consequently perhaps more pernicious is when this attempt to appropriate prestige is not so blatant. It is not a scam per se, right? In the legal sense at least, but it's a scam in a different way because a person attempts to latch him or herself onto an organization, for example, an institution, which has earned in the past prestige in the rightful way, and then somehow attempts to get that prestige, get that name, get that respect without really having paid the price. And this is something that can occur, for example, with the weakening of institutions, with the weakening of selective criteria. For example, if a special forces program in any nation were to, having for decades held themselves to the highest criterion, built up that respect, built up that prestige. These are some dangerous people here. And then suddenly they were to loosen those criteria and allow anybody in, or nearly anybody. You can do a push up, you can do a pull up, you're good to go, and a little bit of training, painless, and so on. It's true that that prestige from all those years that would persist to some point in the future for some time, right? Because that's how we roll. We kind of remember how things were, and there's reputation. It takes time for those changes of reputation to be realized. So here would be an opportunity for people to jump in that are anything but tough, anything but disciplined, anything but self-sacrificial and heroic. They'll run in, quickly gain this prestige. I'm special forces. And it's not a scam like in the first place, because they really are then. But it's a scam in a different sense because the price has not really been paid to be a special forces soldier. And it could take years before people realized, oh, the selective criteria now are totally different. This is not what it was. The same thing obviously could go, although it's much harder to perhaps perpetuate or orchestrate in an athletic organization. Right now, to be in the NFL, in the NBA, in the WNBA, those are all positions that offer tremendous prestige. Why? Because it's very hard. Because only the best of the best of the best eventually get to those levels. Imagine, and here it probably is purely imaginative because there's such um, immediate consequences for interrupting, for messing with reality. But imagine that all of a sudden the same thing happened as with the special forces theoretically, and a professional sports team began to allow any schmuck to get up off the couch, get a jersey, and be an official roster member of the team. Right? For some time before people figured out that this is going on, many people that don't deserve prestige could gain prestige. I haven't worked out in 20 years, but I see that I can quickly go and join the roster of this NFL team. Right? And I can quickly show my buddies, look, I'm in the NFL. And before they figure out that that didn't really take anything. We get the idea. And that could go on for a couple months, whatever. Then people see, oh, this is what's going on. And then hopefully that would be done because it's such an obvious case. But that's just, again, a dramatic kind of thought experiment that would demonstrate that. The same thing can go on for much longer in cases where things are not so obvious, perhaps in educational institutions, right? Because everybody can yep, and it takes some discernment to figure out what the truth is by way of speech. It is possible to, for example, um, significantly lower the standards for what it means to be an intellectual person, a scholar, be it a professor, be it a student, and yet or to have that prestige that has accumulated over many decades of elite education to persist for some years, right? The brand name, for example, of some or another university that continues to stand for something, to give people opportunities that are associated with it, yet such as at this point has in reality very little real prestige to give because the standards have been so disintegrated. So we see, anyhow, that this process is at play again ubiquitously all the time. Why? Because it's logical. Because if I feel that I can gain something at a lower price, then it's probable that I will attempt to so do. So what then is the antidote? For others, that's their business. But for ourselves, the antidote is to realize that we cannot truly gain here anything greater than that which is commensurate to the price that we have indeed paid. Right? I cannot really be a Navy SEAL without really being a Navy SEAL. If somehow the Navy SEALs made the criteria do a push up and do a pull up, that wouldn't really make me a Navy SEAL. Right? I would have to be a fool to have any pride for then being called a SEAL, which again, obviously, just a thought experiment, hopefully. If I could get a doctorate, and all that I would have to do is to plug something into AI and get a little essay generated, and I submit it, and I have a PhD, the PhD would mean nothing. I would not really gain anything. Right? It's not actually a shortcut. It really is a gain if I'm able to pay less for a car that I want, right? Supposing that the quality of the car does not dip. It's the same car before it was being offered for this sum. I negotiated, got it for $5,000 less. That's a real gain, right? Because I get the same car. But here I don't get the same thing. If I somehow get myself out of fulfilling the highest criteria of quality so as to become the possessor of some or another degree of prestige, I have not really gained that prestige. I'm just a scammer. And eventually I will be exposed in all likelihood. And certainly all throughout, I will be feeling like an imposter, and for good reason. Something called quote unquote imposter syndrome, where a person feels that he or she is an imposter. Sometimes it is a syndrome because a person is not an imposter. The price really has been paid, and it's simply that some or another pathology prevents me from really feeling that I have paid the price. I still feel like a beginner, like a child, what have we, fine. But there's also a real condition of imposterhood, such as is not a syndrome, which would be precisely what we have been discussing, which is when a person attempts to appropriate some kind of reputation, some kind of name, some kind of fame, some kind of degree of supposed knowledge and wisdom that he or she does not really have. Oftentimes, maybe even not only through his or her fault, but because certain institutions and accrediting agencies and such have been weakened, right? And a person is able to get through the door of something supposedly difficult without really paying the price. And in that case, a person feels like an imposter for good reason, because he or she is. If I could join an NFL roster by getting up off my couch, right, and maybe sprinting with the bag of chips for 5 feet before gassing out, that would certainly make me an imposter. It's not a syndrome, it's reality. So the antidote to that reality of imposterhood would be to never look for those shortcuts. Try to pay a greater price than I need to. For the car, try to pay a smaller price. For the home, try to pay a smaller price. Negotiate, no problem. But for my prestige, for my real accolades and respectability, pay the greatest possible price. It's a no-brainer. Pay the greatest price that I possibly can. It's better to have, for example, real knowledge and wisdom, but not have any official educational accreditation than to have the latter without the former. It's better to be a real athlete, a great athlete, and yet not be associated with some kind of prestigious athletic organization than to be so associated and not to be a great athlete. It's better to be truly, say, tough, mentally tough, physically tough, than to try to get a diploma on physically and mentally tough from some kind of bogus organization. It'll give you a certificate. We get the point. It's better to have the real thing and be the real deal. So there's no shortcuts in reality to prestige, but understanding that by and large, we do seek to maximize our prestige while minimizing the effort involved is something that can help us gain clarity on many aspects of society and the world as it is. Thank you for listening.